Welcome to Catalyzing Faith, where we seek to be a catalyst for your faith so that you can be a catalyst in the world around you. This series is called Catalyzing Questions, and our goal is to provide you with answers to some of the common questions and objections that you are likely to receive. And in today's video, we are talking about the question, does Christianity teach God of the gaps? One of the most common things you'll hear when you get involved in apologetics is this assertion that Christians are guilty of what's called a God of the gaps fallacy. But what is that, and is it true? A God of the gaps fallacy is what we call it when someone doesn't know the answer to something, and so they jump straight to the conclusion that God did it. A classic example of this is the phenomenon of lightning. If you're an ancient person, you don't have an understanding of how electric charge works, so you see lightning and don't have a way to explain it. So what you do is you posit this God that exists as an explanation for the lightning. And unfortunately, a lot of Christians, if we're honest with ourselves, do engage in something like this when they talk about why they believe in God. A classic example of this that I can think of from back when I was a college student is a clip from Bill O'Reilly where he is talking to somebody and he simply goes, well, the tide comes in and the tide goes out. You can't explain that. The problem here should be obvious. If all we're doing is using God to fill gaps in our current understanding, then when we obtain more and more knowledge, we have less and less room for God. And this becomes particularly embarrassing when, like the example of the tide, we actually have a pretty good scientific model to describe the phenomenon we're looking at. But thankfully, when it comes to apologetics, and when it comes to serious apologists, nobody engages in reasoning that comes even close to this. Serious apologists engage in a sort of reasoning process that is either deductive or an inference to the best explanation, or some combination of both. So what does a deductive argument look like? It comes in the form of a logical syllogism. And one of the most famous examples of a logical syllogism is the Kalam cosmological argument that is popularized by William Lane Craig. The argument goes like this. Premise 1, whatever begins to exist has a cause. Premise 2, the universe began to exist. Therefore, conclusion, the universe had a cause. And if we dig into the details of what that cause must be, we end up with something that is very close to the God of Christianity. Now, that is a topic for a different video, so we're not going to dive into that discussion right now. What's important for the purposes of this video is that we pay attention to the structure of the argument. Simply that it nowhere appeals to a gap in knowledge in order to justify that God exists. Quite contrary to that, we have a couple of premises. These are statements, and if these statements are each true, they lead to the conclusion that God exists. There's no way around that. So when presenting an argument like this, we simply just have to present arguments and evidences for each of the two premises. That's how this works. We have premises, and we give arguments in favor of those premises. So it's not saying we have a gap in our knowledge and using that to find room to put God into our worldview. Rather, we are actually using the very knowledge we do have to justify premises that lead to the conclusion that God exists. In other words, a deductive argument simply cannot be a God of the gaps fallacy based on logical structure alone. We can even see this God of the gaps accusation be incorrectly thrown at intelligent design theorists. Now, whether you agree with their arguments or you disagree with their arguments is not important for this. What's important is that intelligent design theorists aren't simply saying, well, we don't know how to explain this, therefore God. What they're doing is they're providing arguments and reasons for why they believe that appealing to a designer makes more sense of the observable data than appealing to any sort of naturalistic explanation. In other words, they are simply looking at the data and providing an inference to the best explanation. That is how science works, and that is not a God of the gaps fallacy. So even though there are certainly some Christians out there who provide bad arguments and provide God of the gaps arguments from time to time, that shouldn't distract from the fact that serious apologetics is involved in providing rigorous arguments that are deductive in nature, that are inferences to the best explanation, and do not appeal to gaps in knowledge. So when someone comes up to you and simply asserts that Christians are just guilty of appealing to a God of the gaps, simply point out the deductive nature of the argument or the rigorous inferences to the best explanation, and outline how that alone demonstrates that no, when it comes to serious apologetics, nobody is involved in God of the gaps reasoning. Thanks for watching this installment of Catalyzing Questions. If you enjoyed this video, you will probably enjoy some of the other content we have here, so be sure to check that out. But before you do, please leave us a comment down below, push like on this video, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel.